Right, what a lovely welcome. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A bit subversive in these times. I was going to start with a joke about gender identity, but I couldn't decide which pronoun to use for the punchline. So I will just stick with the raw we and say we're all here in support of Family First to fight for a nation where families thrive and women's rights are protected.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So, as a mother of 3 daughters, a wife, a lawyer, and an unapologetic lawyer for women's rights, I was very honoured to accept Loyal's invitation tonight. So thank you so much. And I do have to admit, for full disclosure, despite what happened to me with the Liberal Party, I am still a member for my sins. My view is that it's better to be fighting from within than without. So I do remain hopeful, still turning up, but we shall see. So I was invited to speak about the war on women, a crisis waged through policies, culture, sport and the courts that seeks to redefine womanhood, prioritise feelings over biology and undermine the family foundation that makes Australia strong. Recently I came across archival footage of Australia in the 1960s. Many women actually did work in offices, family businesses, public service until they were married, of course, and then that ban was overturned in the late 60s. They worked on farms, factories as professionals. But back then, motherhood and marriage were highly valued. It was a time when a single income and £10,000 could secure a freestanding brick home in a nice suburb where your children were raised with stability and the freedom to roam the neighbourhood safely. And women had genuine choices about their families without fear of judgment. But today, women feel pressure to prioritise either themselves or their careers over family, with fewer resources to make real choices about motherhood. We are expected to have it all, but this means doing it all. And the results are not pretty. Mental illness has exploded, particularly amongst young people, and especially young women of a certain political persuasion. Substance abuse has increased, loneliness epidemic, marriage rates are down and separation rates are up. Children are in industrial for-profit daycare, and these children will not only not be able to afford to buy the lovely brick home I just described, they will not be able to afford to rent an apartment in a vertical ghetto. And our replacement rate is at a point that no civilisation has come back from. So the war on women is a war on family and our culture. So tonight I'm going to share my journey to marriage, discuss the crisis of declining marriage and birth rates and what we can do about it, if anything, expose the insidious ideology that is threatening women and fundamental freedoms, hopefully propose some solutions that can make Australia family friendly again, and I'll be mentioning a few of those who have paid the cost for speaking the truth. So let's start with marriage and its erosion. Marriage rates have dropped from its highest point in 1942 of 12 per 1,000. It declined in the 70s with the Family Law Act and the Sexual Revolution, and now we're looking at about 4.5 per 1,000. With fewer younger people marrying and many waiting until their 30s or beyond. And I myself once bought into the liberal feminist narrative that de facto relationships and dating were the same as marriage, modern, free and equal. But they're not. Research shows that de facto couples are up to 8 times more likely to separate than married couples who did not cohabit first, and such instability often leaves women and children financially vulnerable, facing higher poverty rates and loss of assets post-separation. Studies indicate children in nuclear families tend to have better health and fewer behavioural issues. This is not to diminish single-parent and blended families. Far from it. I do understand that life is complex and sometimes it does not always follow the expected script.
Yeah.
But the data shows the reality, and this gives us something to aspire to. But I resisted marriage and settling down. I chased the feminist dream. I got educated. I travelled. I moved overseas with just a backpack. I believed that if I dated like Carrie Bradshaw, had a closet full of designer shoes and a Cosmopolitan in my hand, I'd be fine with my friends and we'd all be happy forever after. But who would have thought in 2025, upon reflection of those iconic 90s ladies in the Sex and the City, Charlotte, who we all mocked and derided as traditional and prudish at the time, well, she was actually the one who had it right all along. So I lived what I thought was a liberated life, dating strangers on Match.com, which was the precursor to Tinder. But one morning in San Francisco, I was the national sales manager for a winery in Mendocino. I woke up alone. Not even a pot plant to keep me company, let alone a cat. I was overweight, I was unhealthy and profoundly lonely. Travelling 3 weeks out of 4, I couldn't build the friendships or community that I needed to thrive. And of course, the American food did me no favours. But the final straw was a relationship with a stranger that I met online. The relationship turned violent and I had to get the police involved and needed to seek an AVO. A hot mess, I rang my dad in tears and his words cut through. Katie, what are you doing? You need to come home to your tribe. So I did. I packed up, came home, and I'm incredibly grateful that I had my network and my family to help me pick up the pieces. And it resonated with me how important family and community are for human flourishing. So not long after that, I went to the Wharf Bar in Manly on a sunny Sunday afternoon with my girlfriends, a few Sauvignon Blancs, and I saw this beautiful Beaches boy, a surfer tradie with a 67 Mustang. So after a few years of dating and trying to get it together, we were blessed with unexpected and premature twins, and then I had postnatal depression. We weren't married, which actually I found out later, when you're not married, you have a higher rate of postnatal depression. And if the babies are unexpected, and if they're premature, and if they're twins. But we settled in Manly Vale, and I continued to resist commitment and resist marriage, convinced that co-parenting and de facto status sufficed. So after getting over the shock of effectively going from a single life in the eastern suburbs to a mum in the northern beaches, I finally came to accept the monumental changes in my life. I saw them as blessings, and motherhood did end up transforming me. And for the better. I wanted to be better for my girls and for my family. So I commenced a law degree with twin babies, likely in a sleep-deprived haze as my twins were on different schedules. There was one awake at any moment for about a year, but I persisted and we welcomed a third daughter, mid-degree. But as I watched our society become more divided, more competitive and more fractured, I came to realise my role as a mother was to provide a strong foundation against an uncertain world. Being rather analytical about it, I learned marriage contributes to wealth accumulation through shared resources and financial stability. And as I said, children do better when parents are married. So after the experience of the 2022 election, which was a very powerful lesson in who and what is important. So a decade after meeting Dave, we finally tied the knot in Mudgee in 2024 with our beautiful girls at the heart of the ceremony. So ironically in my story, everything that I had resisted, family, commitment and marriage, that is what empowered me. It did not constrain me. Secure and as a mother and a wife, having a sanctuary of a home where I was just mum, where my life outside the home, my career began to flourish in ways that I could not have imagined, because home gave me the confidence to be the person that I always thought I could be. The promise made to Gen X women of independence actually undervalued marriage and motherhood and ignored the strength that women can find when you are fighting for a family unit. It gives you something bigger than yourself. So William Thackeray was not wrong when he said, "Mother is the name for God in the lips and hearts of children." And I always want to cry when I hear that, because as mothers, we are. And it is the most important responsibility that any of us will ever shoulder. So when I look at my 3 daughters, I am reminded every day of what's at stake. They are more than my children. They are the next generation of women who will carry forward our values, culture, and the nation's future. But how can they thrive in a world that makes it harder to be a wife, mother, or community leader? How can we be good mothers when we're trying to do it all and caught in a web of conflicting priorities? Mothering is not just raising children, it's teaching them the art of living, grounded in love, community, and strength.
Okay.
These are the building blocks of a thriving society. Yet we ask more and more of mothers while providing less. Less support, less time, less opportunities to care for our children as we know best. It's a tragedy for women and a crisis for our nation. It is very difficult to articulate how profoundly you are changed by motherhood, especially. As women, the structure of our brain changes, the symbiosis between an infant and its mother, particularly if breastfeeding. We carry the actual DNA of our children within us, and they carry a version of our DNA and, of course, their father's DNA forward. As the author Neil Postman said, children are the living messages we send to a time we will not see. They are our legacy and our future. But of course, in the modern era, motherhood and fatherhood have just been subsumed by parenthood. Anyone can be a parent, and motherhood now ends with pregnancy. We are supposed to deny this profound emotional, spiritual, mental and physical change we undergo and bounce back to the person we were simply with a baby in tow. No wonder there is such an epidemic of mental health issues amongst new mothers and women generally. So after having my girls, I thought I'd better reacquaint myself with feminism, but I felt stymied by the shortcomings of the liberal version, where independence and body positivity often devolved into hypersexuality, appearance-based value, and social media vacuous messaging. Girl boss nonsense. Things that had caused me so much damage and not the experiences that I wanted for my daughters. So I explored and I came across radical feminism. This is the second-rate feminism that underpinned the Sex Discrimination Act, which secured opportunities for women to participate equally in public life. I do support this, and I'm sure many of us do. Women do deserve the right to pursue education, careers, leadership and property opportunities. But it's the have-it-all narrative that ignores women's reproductive realities. Beyond abortion, it ignores the needs of our children and the importance of a strong family unit in which to raise those children. Having it all means doing it all, and inevitably something has to give. I frequently hear from women in distress, at the pinnacles of their careers, the main breadwinner even, who are beside themselves because they feel like they are failing at everything. Not enough time with their kids, and often it is the relationships, especially the children, that suffer. So about a decade ago, after I'd immersed myself in all this feminism again, I noticed a shift in discourse from women's struggles to abstract notions of gender and identity. And this was starting to infiltrate our institutions and our media. It led me to confront gender identity ideology, which to my great surprise was already embedded in our Sex Discrimination Act through amendments in 2013. Now this threatens the rights that women fought for. It reduces womanhood to a subjective state, restricts free speech, allows biological males into women's spaces, and through compelled pronoun use and enforcing compliance to the ideology through social, civil and criminal sanctions, as Lyle can testify to. It demands we reject biology to affirm male identities. And the ideologues have been chipping away at this stealthily behind the scenes since about the 90s. And before this, the role of women as mothers, wives and workers and their sex-based rights were respected. Now asserting our boundaries invites punishment. In South Australia recently, even mothers grieving the loss of a baby through stillbirth or miscarriage are no longer sacrosanct. The bureaucrats opening a parliamentary inquiry prioritising the men who wish to pretend to be women, and then the bureaucrats refuse to back down in the ensuing media maelstrom. How disrespectful. What an irony that women finally achieve rights in law and then all of a sudden there are these men, not all men, just the ones in frocks, clamouring to be let in. So for such a serious issue, the absurdly named Giggle v Tickle, and as mentioned, I am Sal's instructed solicitor, So Sal Grover, CEO of a female-only app, was found by the Federal Court of Australia to have indirectly discriminated against Roxanne Tickle when she removed him from her digital platform. Tickle is a man. He has changed his sex registration from male to female on his Queensland-issued birth certificate. He shops in the female section of the store. He has told his friends and co-workers he's a woman, and he has put on evidence that was accepted to say that he has had medical intervention. Tickle was awarded costs and $10,000 in damages because Sal responded to a meme, arguably political satire, that Tickle's counsel put down in front of Sal when she was in the witness box, and she let out an involuntary laugh for which she immediately apologised. But she was punished with $10,000 in damages. And further, and importantly, the decision decided that sex is changeable, it is not binary, and it is a social construct not necessarily based on biological reality. So Sal's appeal was heard in the full court of the Federal Court earlier last month. Arguments were put forward by her team that woman is an adult human female, and Parliament had no intention to redefine the word to include men, that taking a special measure for substantive equality between men and women does not even meet the threshold of discrimination under Section 7D for the purposes of the Act. Importantly, even if, to use the other's terminology, this causes a trans woman to suffer discrimination. So as at first instance and at the appeal, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner was amicus curiae, and she argued in favour of sex being changeable, not binary, and a social construct. The ordinary definition, we are told, has moved on to include men. I'm not sure that would pass the pub test. But they also argued for an interpretation that a special measure to achieve substantive equality for protected characteristics, so there's 9 characteristics, whether it's men and women, breastfeeding, not breastfeeding, sexual orientation, family responsibilities, and so on. But if that special measure caused detriment to any other protected characteristic, it would meet the threshold for discrimination. So this effectively collapses the entire federal sex discrimination framework, because special measures are special. Someone is always going to be left out, but this will mean that women can no longer have anything female in case a trans woman felt excluded. The only people who win on that interpretation are the men wanting to get into women's spaces. We also had an 11th hour intervener, Equality Australia, may be familiar to many of you in this room. So after spending 5 years and $500 million taxpayer dollars to fight for same-sex marriage, it turns out that they think sex is a social construct too. So what was the point of that entire debate if they could have just identified as whatever they wanted? Lesbian Action Group also intervened because they had lost an application to the Australian Human Rights Commission for a special exemption to have female-only lesbian events. The rationale for the decision was it was being mean to the men in frocks, the men who pretend to be women, who are sexually attracted to women. In other words, heterosexual men in a dress. But in this brave new world, these men are actually lesbians. So, and this is according to the Australian Human Rights Commission. So the Lesbian Action Group referenced in their submissions the landmark, unanimous, full bench UK Supreme Court decision known as For Women Scotland, where the women won and the sensible decision was handed down that woman means adult human female. Exactly. So the blokes with certificates or self-proclaimed identities are not women, and the judges took great pains to explain that they were still protected against discrimination, even though from listening to the trans side of things, you might think that that is not the case. But needless to say, the rainbow activists are not happy, and the women are facing years of further legal action to force recalcitrant institutions to comply with the law and not the law as they wish it to be. And there's one thing I'd like to share. It was the lesbians for me when the scales truly fell from my eyes with respect to transgender ideology. The men pretending to be women, this is years ago, were holding seminars on how to inveigle their way into lesbian events and dating pools. and trick, coerce or shame lesbians into having sex with them. Breaking the cotton ceiling, they said. In other words, a reference to women's underwear. Rape culture, essentially. So this is the depravity at the heart of gender identity ideology. Women lose their right to consent, they lose their right to have boundaries, and when they do say no to men, they are gaslit and punished. In Australia, of course, Kira Lee, who we all know, she has endured nearly 10 separate proceedings with AVOs upheld and charges of hate speech and vilification for sharing publicly available information, names and photos of two men who play in women's soccer. Her most recent decision was handed down last week and she faces losing her home if she has to pay each bloke the maximum $100,000 in damages each. The court decided Kira Lee was not protected by the implied right of political communication. The burden on her right is limited and of minor significance when it came to protecting the feelings of these blokes who want to play soccer with women. The claim that these men are the most vulnerable, the most oppressed, the most discriminated against is nothing more than extreme social gaslighting, especially when they have the might of the Australian government on their side. So obviously we've got Family First Lyle Shelton, who continues to fight his battle in this space, and Graham Lenihan, who's been absolutely vociferous in defending women's rights, but he was arrested this week, arriving in Heathrow by 5 armed police for 3 tweets he made back in April when he was in the United States. He was detained but released and restricted from tweeting during his time in the UK. He's there to face charges of harassment brought by a man pretending to be a woman who has been reported by many others for harassing many other people. He was also allegedly part of a group that released thousands of insects into a conference for gay and lesbian rights. Lenihan intends to sue the Met Police for his wrongful arrest and detainment. But the Met Police have responded by saying the laws need to be reviewed, acknowledging inappropriate use of police resources. But in Australia, of course, we are headed in the opposite direction, with a suite of federal and state laws strengthening hate speech and vilification for any of the protected species under the new identitarian religious regime. In fact, I hope you all donate to my crowdfund should I get arrested for this speech. In an attempt to fight back, with the backing of my law firm, we have set up the Common Sense Defence Fund, where we will be commencing litigation to fight some of these cultural battles in the courts on our own terms. We constantly find ourselves the respondents or defendants, and the other side is very good at lawfare to progress their worldview and punish those who don't comply. CDF, we will be the applicants and the complainants. The other side had their strategic public litigation fighting funds like Grata Fund or the Environmental Defence Office, but now it's time for ours. So Common Sense Defence, stay tuned. So going back to the war on women, Australia's declining birth rates, another casualty, is signifying a deepening crisis. As of July 2025, our fertility rate is a record low of 1.4 babies per woman, far below the 2.1 needed to sustain our population. Women today are having fewer children later in life and often not the number they want. Liberal feminism's push to delay family for careers is of course a factor, as are crushing economic pressures. Rapid, uncontrolled immigration places further strain on Australian families. And unlike in years past, when policies supported single-income families and preserved our way of life, today's system pushes both parents into work. Women face a constrained choice. They want families but fear financial or career penalties. Without significant changes, our ageing population will strain our economy and social fabric. And as I said, the rapid, mass, uncontrolled immigration is not the answer, because it brings its own problems, as we are all seeing this week out on the street and in our parliament. But to make Australia family friendly again, we need bold policies, and I'm sure you are all very familiar with Family First's commitment to this cause and their detailed policies on this issue. I certainly don't claim to have all the answers, but we owe it to children, to families, to women, to have full and frank conversations about what is really going on, and not thinking the answers are throwing more millions at daycare or companies offering to pay to freeze the eggs of their young female staff. Childcare subsidies for family-based care or home education, easing pressure on mums returning to work. Research shows that children up to the age of 3 have better long-term outcomes if they remain with mum for emotional security and cognitive growth. Daycare, while an unavoidable necessity for some, can't replicate that bond, which is critical when the child's brain is forming. IVF. It should be a last resort, not a backup plan for delaying motherhood. We all know someone who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars for an elusive, much-wanted baby and not necessarily having a successful outcome after delaying motherhood. We need to have conversations with young women about the realities of their fertility and the difficulties of falling pregnant, being pregnant and giving birth as an older mother. I've had many friends, too many to count, in Gen X who've waited. They've either missed out altogether, or they've had very difficult births and pregnancies, or they've only had 1 or 2 children and they would have dearly loved more. And then, of course, we're absolutely exhausted, being middle-aged mums running around after toddlers and then even approaching a retirement age and having to deal with teenagers. And let's face it, a household with tween daughters and a mother going through the change is like hosting a daily emotions Olympics, with gold medals for the loudest cry and the fastest mood swing. Just ask my husband. But that is the cost of delayed motherhood. I find encouragement in the rise of the new right in America, particularly amongst the youth, Gen Alpha and Zoomers, who are rebelling against the individualism of Gen X and Millennials. Gen X rejected Boomers' conservatism, while Millennials embrace identity politics and causes like climate activism. But today, young people, particularly in the UK, there is a return to traditional Christian beliefs and family values, with church attendance, particularly a young men, quadrupling in the last 6 years. So this shift shows that they're rejecting excessive individualism in favour of marriage, parenthood and meaningful connections. Perhaps the kids will be okay after all. So fighting for strong families is like trying to get my tween daughters to agree on a movie for family night. It's a marathon of debates and drama, but when you finally come together, you build memories that last a lifetime. As JFK said, children are the world's most valuable resource and its best hope for the future. A nation that doesn't replace itself through children, families and values has no future. So now is the time to act. We cannot sit idly by while womanhood and family life are undermined in society and in the courts. We need leaders who will stand firm, speak boldly and defend Australia's values. Together we can reclaim a future where families thrive, women are protected and children grow up loved. Let's ensure the world our daughters and sons inherit is worthy of their potential. Thank you.